All righty. So, easiest question first. I'm sure you've done this before, obviously. I've seen it. So, if you could just say and spell your first and last name and then your title.
Sure. And is the angle okay? Do I have enough
Yeah, that's
legroom?
perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
All right, cool. Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch, immigration attorney.
perfect. And then we spell your name too.
KateLincoln-Goldfinch.
So, Kate, I think one of the important things I want to start with is really talking about your work as an immigration attorney. I think a lot of people know the job. It's a really respectable job, but they don't really know a lot of the details. So, kind of explain about what you do sort of on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I've been an immigration lawyer in Texas for 15 years. So I've worked with a lot of asylum seekers, many of whom are already in the US and maybe in a detention center or preparing for their hearings before an immigration judge. And I also do a lot of family-based immigration and other types of humanitarian immigration for crime victims, domestic violence victims, and things like that.
And I want to talk about before we get into the president's visit and everything going on. But what are some of the things that you've seen or that we've seen or you've heard coming out of the border, especially in the last couple of months? I think there's been a lot going on over the years, but I think the last couple of months have had a big eye on them.
Sure, I think the era that we're in this moment, we have had the border closed for 2 years under Title 42. So the vast majority, almost all of the asylum seekers from around the globe who normally under previous policy would have been screened and either allowed in or not under old asylum procedure have been trapped at the border. And so that population has grown. And it has been a dangerous place for many migrants. Cartels often kidnap migrant families who are vulnerable in Mexico. They're not in their home country. And the flip-flop and back and forth on policies like MPP and Title 42 creates uncertainty amongst that population. And so it just increases the amount of chaos and people there who don't have answers. And frankly, Biden's border announcement continues this policy of chaos and doesn't allow for would-be asylum seekers to screen themselves and see if they would qualify for protection in the United States.
And let's talk about that border announcement because I know that's been pretty big. And obviously, we're going to get into today's the first time in his presidency that he's actually made it down to the border. So let's talk a little bit about the announcement, but also, in your opinion, sort of the importance to actually have, a sitting elected official actually come lay eyes on the situation.
Sure. I mean, I think a visit is a great idea. I myself have been down to visit the border camps, and it is an incredibly eye-opening experience to see people living in these conditions. On the other hand, the visit is tied to the announcement of the new policy, which frankly is really disappointing. And I don't think anybody is satisfied with it because what Biden is doing is extending Republican era border enforcement policies under public health provisions, which is not a way that we enforce border policy, and actually increasing enforcement and actions of punishment against migrants who are just seeking safety, while also creating a limited program for some people from certain countries, 4 countries, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. A limited number of people can apply to come here if they show they've got a sponsor in the US, and of course, if they show that they don't have a criminal background. But the problem is that that is not an asylum system, right? Our asylum system is based on, has an individual person been persecuted on account of a protected ground, their race, their religion, their nationality, their political opinion, or their membership in a particular social group. It's a case-by-case individualized determination built on 70 years of law that we've established in this United States, in this country. And this new policy creates no way for asylum seekers to apply for protection in the US.
And I think the thing about that too is that, so I kind of want to go into having you explain Title 42. Obviously, we know it's the health, the COVID protocol, COVID era protocols. But I think what was interesting is obviously there was that week or so that we just saw where a lot of people thought that was about to be lifted. So can you kind of explain Title 42 and where we are with this and sort of how we now know that it's leading into that new policy that they just announced?
So the usage of Title 42 was initiated by Trump, and they actually tried to bring in Title 42 to close the borders because of a mumps outbreak. That was blocked by the courts. But then when COVID happened, the Trump administration was able to shut down the border under Title 42 because it was a significant health issue, right? But now that we have other ways of managing and protecting ourselves against COVID, the Title 42 is a border enforcement tool, has not gone away. So the Biden administration announced that they would lift it, and they were supported in that endeavor by the federal court system. But then a Republican-led litigation went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court blocked it. But now Biden himself is announcing his own determination to continue the policy to enforce the border against asylum seekers, while also saying we're going to do expedited removal against asylum seekers and bring back the transit ban, which is another block on asylum that didn't make it through the court system under the Trump administration. So Biden is continuing and bringing back Trump era anti-asylum policies. And it's quite perplexing to me, because I think the solution to this, what we have is a chaotic situation, right? But the solution is to get back to the system that we had in place that was functioning pre-Title 42, where we screened asylum seekers. Do they qualify? Do they not? In a 1-hour asylum interview. And if they don't, they have to go home to their country. And if they do, they get to come in and go before an immigration judge. That was a functioning system that we dismantled. So now we have 2 years of backlog of asylum seekers who never got the chance to apply. So turning that system back online creates a little bit of chaos, but we have to get through that to get back to the functioning system that we once had.
So I think there would be obviously some criticism. I know we see it a lot through comments or whatever, where people, I mean, you look at El Paso, and I guess, officials there say we're getting tens of thousands of migrants coming in. And so when some people may say that, this is good, this is good protections. But I think something important here is when we're talking about countries like Venezuela, for example, like when we're talking about asylum seekers, basically what I'm asking is, from what what are some of the reasons that these migrants actually try to come here? I think it's better for us to explain kind of like, what you've seen in stories you've heard.
Yeah. So we see migrants, of course, from all over the globe, from countries in the Middle East and countries from Africa who come to our southern border. We also see migrants from Central America who are fleeing gang violence. And typically it's the children who are most vulnerable. And that's why we see more families coming. Also, recently, we've seen more political asylum applicants from countries like Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. And that's because political persecution in those countries is increasing. So there isn't one reason, but what I've seen over the years in my work as an asylum attorney is that there are fluctuations. And sometimes we get a bunch of people from one country because of what's going on in that country. And so creating a policy where we say we're only going to parole people from Venezuela or from Cuba doesn't allow for the situations that are going on around the globe, which is why I say what we need to do is have an orderly system for screening asylum seekers that will handle applicants regardless of what's happening and where, because this momentary limited parole process for people from Venezuela is not going to resolve the issues of tomorrow.
Absolutely. Just a couple more. One of the big ones, which I just kind of just wanted to see if you had an opinion on this. We saw a lot of busing coming out of El Paso, whether it was into New York, Northeast cities and states. Something interesting is obviously Governor Abbott was a part of this, but also the Democratic mayor in El Paso had even taken up some of this. So it showed that that kind of option went across party lines. Is this a viable option? I think some people would say that it seems really intense off the bat when you hear about it, but I guess some others would say that, this is a way to kind of not have these cities so overwhelmed. What would you say about the busing policies?
Well, I think there's a difference between DeSantis flying migrants from Texas to Martha's Vineyard and dumping them without any support, or Abbott taking migrants on Christmas Eve in the cold, freezing weather to Washington, D.C., and again, dumping them for attention, for media attention. Those are stunts, right? That is comes from a place of cruelty. But also, when we have migrants coming in, who many of whom are not wanting to stay in the border of Texas, they're wanting to go wherever their friends and their family are in the United States, maybe we could consider, rather than ignoring these populations that need our help and that would qualify for asylum under our laws, maybe we could consider dignified humanitarian efforts to assist them to get to where they're going. I don't think that's what Republican governors have been doing, but I do think providing people some support, letting them know how to check in at their court hearings, how to, communicate with their ICE officer, getting them to their friends and family. Sure, that would be in the spirit of the United States that I know and love.
My last question really is kind of circling back to the visit. I actually have two. MPP, I know you described that when you spoke with us not long ago. Can you kind of describe that to me? MPP, the protections. I believe that was Trump era as well, right? Or
Yeah.
okay.
So MPP stands for Migrant Protection Protocols, and it was pre-Title 42 Trump era policy that registered people in the asylum system, but sent them back to Mexico without any support. And that's when we initially saw these tent camps spring up, because these are people who have court hearings in the US, but they aren't allowed to come into the United States. So that was a failed policy, created a lot of this border chaos. And both MPP and Title 42 are not long-term solutions to what we're experiencing.
Absolutely. So my last question goes back to his visit. So obviously the announcement of the policy, a lot of border announcements coming from them, and then today being his first time. But do you think that with him, it's hard because since it's already announced, but do you think that with him actually going there for the first time in his presidency, that could have some significance towards, more policy in the future, or is this really just to almost cement what's already been announced?
I am an optimist at heart, but I also know that when a president comes to a place, the experience is very curated. For example, there were migrants in El Paso who were moved because the president was coming. So I think the experience that the president has is probably not going to be based in actual reality. It's going to be based in what people want him to see. So I don't know if it'll have an impact. I hope it touches his heart. I hope he meets some of these families like I have. And when you put a, human face on a story or a policy, it can really make an impact. And so hopefully that does happen, but we'll see.
And then I know we already talked about this and you described this, but I guess the simplest question, well, not a simple question, but the question of what is the answer? So obviously if you have people that don't live by these borders and they think that it's just wide open, right? And that's what a lot of people have the perspective. And then you see these policies come in to kind of alleviate that, if you may say, what is the answer when it comes to allowing people into this country?
Yeah, I think the answer to this issue is twofold. First, on asylum seekers, get back to a system where we screen them quickly to see whether they qualify, and only the people who probably qualify get into the country through the credible fear interview system. Part two is that Congress actually acts to pass immigration reform that reflects the needs of the United States economy for immigrant labor all across the skill spectrum, low skilled, medium skilled, high skilled. If there are ways for people who are not asylum seekers to come here and work legally, to support the jobs that we actually need them to do here in the United States, it's going to reduce a lot of the southern border issue. Now, it's asylum and it's immigration reform, but those two together would solve a lot of problems.
And I mean, especially with legislative session coming right up here on our statewide level too. I mean, lots of things that need to be discussed. So I guess, that'll be important for those to be taken up.
Yeah, I think we've seen this before in the US. We've seen this against Irish Catholic, German, Italian, Jewish, Chinese immigrants, this anti-immigrant rhetoric. And it's really dangerous because what happens is when we start talking about immigrants as if they are a danger, legislators who are elected on those platforms don't go on to pass legislation that actually supports our needs as an economy. So I think it's incumbent upon the voters, the constituents, and the lawmakers and the leaders to stop talking about immigrants as if they are bad and evil and not good for the United States. We all need to cut out that rhetoric because we're halting progress that we actually need.
Absolutely. Well, let me stop this recording.